Sevestopol. These are the last days of summer, and tourists are soaking up the last of the sun's rays. The Russian seamen can also begin to relax, as the Black Sea Fleet has returned to port after deployment off the coast of Georgia. May 2008. The Black Sea Fleet is celebrating its birthday with great pomp and ceremony. Founded by Russian Empress Catherine the Great 225 years ago, this fleet underlines the strategic importance of Sevestopol. These days you could be forgiven for forgetting that Sevestopol is in fact not in Russia, but in Ukraine. Aside from historic ties, Russia's claims on the seaside city lie in the large number of Russian nationals living here. In May 2008, Yuri Luznov, the mayor of Moscow, declared Sevastopol a part of Russia. Stunned Ukrainian officials have since banned him from entering their country. Luznov says that historically Sevastopol has always been Russian. He wants the question of the city's nationality settled. The citizens of Sevastopol too want their town's relationship with Moscow clarified. We're on a harbour cruise. Here the Russian influence is everywhere. No mention of Ukraine. The tourist industry is dominated by Russians. They have no interest in Ukrainian culture, or indeed in their fleet docked next door, or so says Elena Vorobyeva, our tour guide. Given this attitude, it's no surprise that there is no word on the subject that everyone is thinking about: the looming date for Russian withdrawal from Sevastopol. I don't think the Russian fleet will ever leave. This is not an issue. I think that our politicians are wise enough to guarantee the survival of our fleet. This is a Russian city and the pride of our homeland. The war in Georgia is just over. At the invitation of Ukraine, a NATO ship has entered Sevastopol. This has only heightened tension between Moscow and Kiev. The Russian inhabitants of Sevastopol are furious. The hated Americans anchored on their own doorstep. We are visiting the Ukrainian fleet's TV channel, TV Brisa. This is the headquarters of the Ukrainian Navy's media machine. This is Chief Transmitter Miroslav Matstyak. He is also a naval officer. The powers that be have already planned for armed confrontation with the Russians, he explains. The Russians can move their fleet to the moon or to Mars, but the Ukrainian constitution provides a clear date for their departure. No later than 2017, the Russian fleet must have gone. We have seen the dilemma with the war in Georgia. What would have happened if Georgia had attacked the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol? It presents a real danger for us Ukrainians, for the Russian fleet to be stationed here. If the Russians went to war, we would be the first to suffer. When two states fight for dominance, it is the ordinary people who suffer. We wanted to know what the inhabitants of Sevastopol think, those who have nothing to do with politics. 3/4 of these inhabitants are Russian nationals. Many are attached to the fleet. We are in a military general store. This shop owner is called Nikolai. Sailors come here to buy their badges and uniforms. Nikolai is Ukrainian. His clientele mostly young Russian sailors. As a precaution, he has hung an image of the Russian president on the wall. In the back room, Nikolai's employees sew insignia onto uniforms, both for Russian sailors and for Ukrainians. Which uniform do you like best? We ask, trying to put them at ease. This lady is diplomatic. I think I prefer the admiral uniforms. They are so grand. They are not as expensive as you think. It is the gold braid that creates this impression.
Все шевроны золотые, и они бросаются в глаза. Независимо,
Whether Russian or
украинские или
Ukrainian,
Украина или
these
Россия.
uniforms are really all the same.
Любая адмиральская форма, она очень красивая.
The shop owner is less positive, however. He believes that the Ukrainian-Russian mix is a recipe for chaos. With both Ukrainian and Russian clientele, he should know his store is on the front line. It is a pity that the present situation is so heated. The Russians come here and insult us as inferior. It surprises me that the government in Kiev tolerate the situation. I fear that we will become a second, voluntary Ossetia. Voluntary because there are so many Russians here. It could get very dangerous.
Я так боюсь, что это будет второй Цхинвал. Вот здесь вот, когда-нибудь. Он произойдет. Поэтому я не хочу...
But I will not be here then. I have plans to close my shop and move elsewhere before open conflict breaks out.
И уезжать в европейскую страну какую-нибудь.
Mikolai would like to emigrate to the EU, but the Russians have requisitioned his truck. They told him that they would be responsible for importing military equipment. Living in Sevestopol is not easy for Ukrainians. Oleksandr is a policeman. He is visiting a cafe, inquiring about its license. The problem is that the policeman comes from Western Ukraine and refuses to speak Russian. He could if he wanted, but he does not want to. This has created many problems.
Оно не попадает в это самое?
Там есть какие-то бумажки.
Я родився українцем, і українцем я живу.
I'm born in Ukraine. I live in Ukraine. My wife is Ukrainian and my children are Ukrainians. Why in the world do I feel like I am struggling to fit into a foreign culture? This is my country.
Вони українці. І я українець, і ним залишаюся.
Four years ago, Oleksandr moved to a Sevastopol suburb. His neighbours are all Russians. His family came with him, but this will never be home. For Oleksandr, it is language that is most important. It is an expression of his identity. Though Ukrainian and Russian are similar, there are differences. For Oleksandr, Russian is the language of the occupier. Yet he had no choice but to send his youngest son first to a Russian-speaking nursery, and then on to a Russian-speaking school.
От ми з ним розмовляємо на українській мові.
There are only Russian nurseries. Our son had no choice when we arrived here. He was only 4 years old. Now if we talk to him in Ukrainian, he replies in Russian.
Як він ходив в садочок, все, дитина стала російськомовна.
Нагнітає сторони.
It is the differing interests of our governments that have created these problems. Ukrainians against Russians, the West against the East, and so on. Of course, the minorities in Ukraine enjoy special protection. But here in Sevastopol, it is exactly the other way round. We Ukrainians need to be protected. We are the minority in our own country.
В місті Севастополі культура народу України.
As the day draws to an end, it is clear that this beautiful Crimean city is facing a troubled future.